But in the world where we are in, one of the worst things that can happen is people say you're inconsistent. They feel like if you're inconsistent, that shows you must be wrong. But it might show that actually what you're trying to do is to balance two things that in slightly different ways, in different circumstances, are equally important, but appear to our rather simple-minded way of looking at the world like contradictions.
This observation, aside from just being monumentally important in understanding how the world actually works, I think actually contains the seeds of the resolution to the abortion debate. Assuming there is a resolution that can be found and it doesn't just destroy America in the process, which it kind of seems like it's doing. Here's how to think about it. There are only two sides in the abortion debate. Those who believe that aborting a fertilized egg is immoral, and those who believe that it is not. You cannot have an opinion on abortion without directly or indirectly falling into one of those two camps. And technically speaking, the people who believe that aborting a fertilized egg is immoral are the only ones who can truly be said to be logically consistent. But the problem is, they are mistaking their logical consistency for truth. Here is the classic pro-life argument in a nutshell.
If you actually pick up any human biology textbook, it will tell you when life begins. It begins at the moment of fertilization.
Okay, let's agree that life begins at conception. What's the logical conclusion that follows from that premise?
It is wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human life. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human life. Therefore, abortion is wrong.
This framing is 100% logically consistent. And here is the problem that half of Americans have with that framing, despite it being logically consistent. But the problem is, I would be lying it would be dishonest of me to accept your framing, because if I were to accept that framing, that would mean I would have to honestly believe that a woman who drowns her own 3-year-old in the bathtub has committed an equivalent act of evil to someone who took a pill after a one-night stand.
No, that would just make you consistent.
They feel like if you're inconsistent, that shows you must be wrong. But it might show that actually what you're trying to do is to balance two things that in slightly different ways are equally important, but appear to our rather simple-minded way of looking at the world like contradictions.
Here are the two equally important things that we're trying to balance in this debate. The first is recognizing the unavoidable imprecision of our ability to identify exactly at what point a human life magically becomes valuable.
Do you think that once the conception happens, there's some sort of a miraculous event? Like you could literally get to the point where the sperm cracks the egg. If you could scoop that egg out right there, would that be abortion?
Well, I mean, at some point you're going to have to say there was a magic moment that happened because you believe that we eventually become valuable humans, right?
And we have to balance that fact, that imprecision, with the obvious intuition that a woman who drowns her own child, a newborn baby, is not committing a similar act of evil as someone who took a Plan B pill after a one-night stand.
When you're talking about a gamete or a zygote or a pregestation fetus, or you're talking about, somebody taking the morning after pill or something, intuitively people grasp, that's not murder.
Yeah.
What are you, a psycho?
Yeah.
That is literally categorically different. That's why we have different words to describe those things. That's why a gamete is a thing and a zygote is a thing and a pregestation fetus is a thing.
But wait a second, isn't that just an appeal to feelings and intuitions? That's not really an argument, right? Wrong. And if there is one thing you take from this godforsaken video, it is this. The inability to explicitly describe how you know something is true does not mean that it isn't true.
We have this delimited domain of explicit propositional knowledge, but partly because of the requirements for consistency and our finite nature, it can't be comprehensive. There's a famous ruling on pornography that I believe the Supreme Court of the United States laid down, and one of the justices wrote something that's become infamous or famous, depending on how you look at it. He said, well, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And that's a notion of the incomplete ability of the representational system to represent the contents of implicit perception or the procedural system. You can know that you know something, but that doesn't mean you can describe why. It doesn't mean you can describe how you know it.
No, it's a misconception that when we make things explicit, we're closer to the truth. Because often what we do when we make things explicit is that we conflate half a dozen or more different considerations that our intuitive and unconscious minds are able to weigh remarkably effectively. We substitute for that holistic vision a single thing, that it collapses into the explicit statement that we make. And so all the time that you're having to make explicit what you would do under what circumstances and why, you're limiting the world. You're driving it down and down to less and less meaning.
And thus, the limits of logic become obvious. You can't use logic to figure out exactly at what point red becomes orange. You can't use logic to figure out exactly why a joke is funny. And you can't use logic to explain how you know that a woman who intentionally leaves her 3-year-old child in a hot car to die is probably doing something a little more evil than a woman who took a Plan B pill when she was 16. Assuming you're not a psychopath. Is that a fair way to characterize the pro-life argument? No, they're not psychopaths. They're just mistaking logical consistency for truth. So remember that. Good luck and Godspeed.